So I've got 200 slides, so I'm going to be moving very fast today. Well, not, yeah, but actually it will feel that way. So thank you so much. It's an honor to be here presenting to all of you today. So I'm going to be talking about a range of projects that I've been doing that really focuses on how do we take all this data that we have today and try to use it to reimagine how we understand ourselves and the world around us. And this is really my vision, my dream is, can we really create sort of a room, a fusion center, if you will, that pipes into it every piece of open information from across the globe and allows us to see not only what's happening around the world, but what its underpinnings are, what connects it to the rest of the world, how people are feeling about that in real time. This is my vision, and how do we start taking steps towards that? Well, what's interesting is if you think about, think about this incredible world that we live in. About 50,000 years ago, the first modern humans start walking around. 38,000 years ago, the first cave paintings, the first surviving evidence of cave paintings appear. Almost from the beginning, humans start trying to leave a permanent record of what they did, what their feelings are, how they understood the world. 8,000 years ago, writing begins appearing. And this is fascinating because the moment that society starts being recorded, it allows us to compute on, to do so many different things with it. And especially, of course, today where people are sort of, our virtual and our physical heartbeats are beginning to beat as one, where people are live digitizing the world around them. And you think about the spread of electricity. And of course, this is actually the old image. NASA, of course, now has their newer imagery. But you look at this image and where we have electricity across the world. And then we look at this image, and it may be a little bit hard to see. Actually, probably very hard to see. But basically, what you're seeing here, red and white, are areas where one or more tweets have been sent over a period of 2011 or 2012. Blue are areas where there's power, but there's been no tweets recorded from that location. And you'll notice that effectively the only real areas that we see that are basically in areas that are actually either banning Twitter or a few other areas. It turns out that actually power and Twitter are correlated about 0.89, spatially correlated. And actually more power comes more Twitter. So effectively throughout the world, where there's power, there's Twitter. This is really fascinating because this really means that we can observe, we can understand, we can measure society. And all that flows through the computation, it flows through this big network of machines, which means that we can observe that, we can try to understand the world. Now, of course, we shouldn't lose track of the past. And I love this image. This is from the centennial of the nation from one of the railroad companies, talking about how, the founding of the nation, it was, the mail was slow. Getting information was really, really slow. You think about it, in those days that, you could basically put mail for the train to pick up on its way where it was going. And that was considered state of the art. I mean, imagine this. A letter could make it halfway across the world. Well, this is also kind of interesting. If we really think about history and we start reflecting back, think about all these books. Groups like the Internet Archive have been digitizing. 600 million pages they have digitized. But you think about this, historically, libraries have been digitizing books to focus on the text, to make them full text searchable. But books aren't just words, they're imagery. Imagine if you could take, for example, the OCR, so basically the software that converts those books to be searchable text, and take all the images that it's recognized and pull all those out. It turns out what you're seeing here actually is a collage, one image from a book each year. So each one, it starts 1500, 1501, 1502, 1503. 500 years of the images of the world's books in a single image here. And it turns out actually the technology behind this is very simple. It's a 200-line, basically a Perl script that did this. What made this so challenging wasn't the computational aspect of things. It was the data movement. Each of these books, the original scanned imagery, the full resolution imagery behind each of these books, about 500 megabytes to a gigabyte, which doesn't sound much. But you think about that, you've got to stream that across the network. You've got to save that to disk, unpack that, repack that, read that. By the time you're done, depending on how you optimize things, you've got an incredible amount of disk movement that's happening. And so this is an interesting project in that the amount of data, a lot of big data today, a lot of the projects, they're not just, it's all computer, it's all CPU intensive. So much of it really is movement of data. And once we have something like this, once we do this and we create this big gallery, we can start looking at the history of the world. And these are just some great images. The upper left is an image from 1502. The cat, 100 years ago, I don't know how many of you saw the Daily Mail piece this past weekend on this project. 100 years ago, people were dressing up their cats, the cat meme was alive and well. We can see the telephone evolve, from something of business people, to families. We can see imagery, historical illustrations, historical photographs of society. This particular, the image on the upper left is really fascinating. If you look closely, you'll notice this is an illustration from about 1640 of Archimedes setting a boat on fire with a mirror. Now, of course, Mythbusters, prove that that wasn't the case, that couldn't have happened. But you see, the scientific imagery. You see maps, you see birds, and things dating backwards through time. Whatever this crazy contraption is here, which allegedly actually was part of a wedding in the mid 1600s. Apparently, it was the wedding chariot, according to the descriptions. And so this is really fascinating, this ability to really look back at history. This is the cloud, 1967. This was the telephone companies viewed themselves as the cloud. You notice the data center there in the center and all the aspects of our world wrapped around that. And you think about this, or my favorite is this. This is an image on the left is from about 1640, and the image on the right is from about 1680. You notice they're so similar to each other. And this actually was found purely by chance. But the ability now that we have 500 years of imagery in one place, we can actually trace out. So much of data science today is focused on text and natural language processing. You think about an image collection like this that covers almost every topic imaginable, and what you can do with something like that. The possibilities are endless. Now, of course, let's fast forward into the present. What about the social media world? I love this. This is the election of the new Pope in 2005. One little camera phone. And of course, 2013, the things of flood. And every one of these people is broadcasting those views live to the world. And this is very fascinating if you think about the view that we have of society today. What if we took each of those tweets and color-coded every one of those tweets by the language that it was tweeted in? We can start making maps that actually we can zoom in and actually see geographic borders. We can actually see road networks. You can actually drill into London, for example, and say, people that normally tweet from Greece, when they're in London, what are the parts of London that they tend to stay around? People from Paris, when they're there, what are the areas of London that they visit? You can really start observing and understanding how societies are functioning moment by moment. We can start looking at who's talking to whom across the world, how communicative networks play out in the social sphere. This is one of my favorites. So this is something called the Global Twitter Heartbeat that we did back in 2012. So what we wanted to do there was actually map the emotion of Twitter in real time. And so we actually did the presidential election. We did Hurricane Sandy. This is actually a capture of Hurricane Sandy as it was moving up the coast. Blue and green are positive, red and orange are negative. And what was so fascinating about this is you'll notice an area around New York, which was hit very hard, was very positive. And you say, well, how could that possibly be? Well, it's what psychologists call the silver lining effect. People were saying, we've lost everything, but that everyone's okay. Even the dog is okay. Everyone survived. The house can be replaced. And this is fascinating to actually literally see this play out. And my favorite was, there's actually a couple movies on YouTube we made. My favorite is you'll literally see people tweet, all the windows are shattered. The roof is starting to crack and come down. I should probably get out of my house. And I love that people's first thing they do today is to tweet about it, not to get out of there. And I think that says something about society today. And you think about this, how else could we use something like this? So NBC approached me this past fall and said, we want to rethink the future of interactive television. And if you think about what is television, the motto of television, give viewers what they want. Well, what if we could actually see, what if we could actually observe what the fans of a show want in real time and actually adjust the show in real time to address that? So we actually debuted this with Sci-Fi with their new show called Opposite Worlds. It was a very interesting show. I mean, the first episode, they actually had them go up on a platform with actually literally straight out of Star Wars, a taser on a stick. And literally you were on this 20-foot high platform trying to tase the other person to fall off the platform. It was a very, very interesting show. But my aspect of it was this part on the right, which was the what we're calling the Twitter Popularity Index. So what we wanted to do was measure the emotion around each of the characters on Twitter and actually rank that. Now, of course, sentiment mining is one of the hottest areas today. But what's interesting is that about 97% of the literature on sentiment mining today comes from computer science. Measuring emotion is not a computer science problem. Now, yes, you need tools to be able to do that, but it's kind of odd to me that all of the work that's being done on improving how we measure emotion online is, the psychologists, the communications folks, very few of those are involved in the field right now. And it's interesting because part of this project, we did a big piece in Wired on this, because actually as you start drilling down, you find out, for example, that it used to be people would say, I love this show, hashtag opposite worlds. Today they'll say, hashtag, I love JR so much, opposite worlds. So the entire tweet will be one single hashtag you're finding, at least in the entertainment world, which is very different than many other disciplines. So that meant all of a sudden that we had to really reshape how we think about measuring this. So this really sort of involved, how do we step back and treat this not as a technology problem, but actually as an underlying disciplinary problem. And this has been a big focus. I think that as big data is maturing, we really need sort of a bringing together of the computer science folks and the disciplinary folks, because something, for example, building a dictionary of, say, colloquial expressions, jump the shark. These are things that very few computer scientists are focusing on, because it's difficult to collect colloquial expressions and properly understand the boundaries of that expression and the polarity of that. It's difficult to do that reliably within the space. You get a lot of oddities, let's put it that way. So there's a lot of interesting, it's a very interesting world that we live in today, the ability to bring these together. And if you think about, for example, of course, television, the Internet Archive has, one of the largest, collections of television out there. So this project really started with, you think about, we have this enormous archive of, more than 500,000 hours of, or nearly 500,000 hours of closed captioning of all these shows. What's the geography of American television look like today? What do they actually, when someone turns on the TV at night to watch the news, what are they actually seeing? Are they seeing just America? Are they seeing the Middle East? Are they seeing Europe? Well, this is what they're seeing. And so what we did is actually take all that closed captioning stream and actually identify every geographic reference and all of that. There's actually an animate map. You can actually move the time slider forward, pick a particular day, zoom in, click, and actually hop right to the actual snippets of the shows that mention that particular location. You can drill down and switch between CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and see, well, CNN's emphasizing this week, they're focusing on this, but Fox News is ignoring that and they're focusing on this issue. So this ability to really peel back the layers and say, we have these incredible archives that are there. How do we start applying new approaches, whether technology or methodological to those, to understand them in new light? This project in the upper left, so this was a collaboration with the historian of the US State Department and Columbia University. We were interested in all the declassified Kissinger-era State Department cables. So these are essentially their email system of the 70s, where they were sending basic communications between all the embassies. How do you visualize what's basically, you think about, about 1.5 million essentially emails. How do you visualize something like that? If you just make a network diagram of that on a map, it's just spaghetti. There's just lines everywhere. So this is actually a collaboration with the Google Viz team. We actually got to use what they call the arms globe. And what you do is you pick a country, and we actually display the network actually centered on that country. So it's sort of a geographically centered network visualization. This is actually, blue is incoming cables, red are outgoing cables. And you can actually literally watch, you can actually move a time slider and say, Brazil over time, how did the traffic from the US missions in Brazil, how did those flow throughout the rest of the world? And you actually see, for example, a country will all of a sudden, it'll start accepting information from all of the US missions around it, and then it alone will stream that to Washington. And then you'll see all of a sudden all the embassies will start relaying to Washington. So you see these fascinating characteristics that are huge to diplomatic scholars that we've never been able to do before. The data's been there, actually. The data's been digitized for a while now. What we lacked was a visualization modality that allows us to really interact and understand that. The Google Constitute project. So this was the case where all these constitutions have existed around the world. So this is actually Tom Ginsburg and Zach Elkins are the leads on this. But the problem here that we had was we have all these paper constitutions. I mean, basically the records of the world back to 1789. And so how do we sort of systematize collecting those across the world, digitizing those, encoding those? And they actually pull out about 1,200 questions. Can the president fire Congress? All these specific questions encoded in that. How do you deal with this when this is multiplied across every language of the world over 200 years? Who does the most accurate coding of a constitution, a Spanish language constitution from 200 years ago? How do we integrate machine translation, all these other aspects into it? This image in lower right is from a prototype where we're taking the entirety of the Internet Archives book collection, the entirety of the Height of Trust collection, and a couple other peripheral collections, including one of the largest collections of diaries and letters from the Civil War. And we're actually visualizing the American Civil War year by year through the eyes of all the material from that time period, and actually understanding the flow of ideas. So things like states' rights. Where did those start emerging? How did those start mixing with other ideas? How did those themes begin blending and intersecting? Very fascinating abilities to really visualize the flow of information. This was a project we did with Silicon Graphics and Wikipedia, where you think about Wikipedia today. Wikipedia is still, you search it by a text box. A decade after its creation, you still are typing in a keyword search to interact with it. But as an encyclopedia, you think about it, it's so rich with geographic information. So what we did here was actually extract out every geographic reference from the text, about 80 million locations and about 40 million dates, and actually build a huge network diagram over all that. And so, if it says in Paris in 1837, that actually becomes a dot in a map. If it says in London later that year, that gets connected. So there's actually a visual network animation we did that shows world history. But this was a Google Earth visualization where you can actually take a country like Libya, move the time slider down to a particular time period, and we'll show you every location in Libya discussed with respect to that time period across all of the English language Wikipedia. So then you can drill in, click on that, and hop right to that location within that article. And it turns out actually the majority of the information on Libya doesn't come from the Libyan page. It comes from everything else. There'll be something about a plant species was discovered in an 1837 British expedition to some city. You'd never think to go look at this particular plant species for information about the history of Libya. So there's the ability to really look at information through a new light, through new lenses. And of course, that brings me back to this notion of how do we observe the entire world? What if you could build essentially a platform that observed all of society at once? And so that's basically what I focus on. And so this particular project, so the GDELT, GDELT project.org, so the goal of this project is, what if we could collect all of the large fraction of all the news media worldwide every day in about 100 different languages, print, broadcast, web, across the planet, scoop all that up and process through partnerships with media organizations throughout the world and process all that computationally and basically build this massive catalog of human society. And of course, in parallel to this, the percentage of all media worldwide that's available from the web is skyrocketing over time. By 2010, almost half of all news media worldwide was web published. And that's critical because to get, for example, at a 2-watt broadcaster in southern Zimbabwe is very difficult to get at that type of radio station. You actually have to partner with groups that are throughout the world to get that. The more that's web accessible, the easier it is to monitor this across the world. And so what it allows us to do is essentially transform the news of the world into maps. And so what you end up with is something like this, a sentence that says, Iraq criticized Turkey on Monday for bombing Kurdish militants in northern Iraq. So you have a typical news article, a sentence, and this is just one sentence of a news article. And the computer basically processes that and says there's two things going on here. One is that Iraq criticized Turkey, and the second one is that Turkey bombed Kurdish militants in Iraq. So this textual news article becomes basically a series of database entries, which means then that we can take all this pile of news media that's breaking as Egypt was collapsing again last year, we could scoop up all the available news media on that and make a real-time map that was updating minute by minute as to what was happening across Egypt at that moment that was reported in the news media anywhere in the world. We can also then extract out every person, organization, location, theme out of that and build a huge knowledge graph over all that allows us to place into context who's involved with these things. For example, a protest in Egypt that the Muslim Brotherhood is part of is much more important than an ordinary protest, for example. And of course, news media alone isn't quite enough. This is a huge collaboration. It's going to be announced in about a week or so. So basically, what we did here, so this was actually the entirety of JSTOR's holdings, the entirety of unclassified DTIC, which is basically all military and intelligence publication output of the U.S. government. And then scanning of the Internet Archive's PDF archive, looking for anything that was reports, academic literature, dissertations, et cetera, and actually codified this. So about 21 billion words of academic literature about Africa and the Middle East. And the question here, the idea here was to say, could you make essentially a find an expert service where you could zoom in and say, I'm interested in water scarcity with the Noors in this area of South Sudan. Who are the top 5 experts today, the top 5 academic experts in the world on this? You can actually drill in on a map, actually circle that area, and actually return and actually go through the citation graphs of all these papers and actually process that and say, here are the top experts that specialize in this. You can drill in. Here's actually a very interesting set of maps. Here's the geographic footprint of not where they're published, but basically what's the geographic focus of papers of U.S. government literature. You'll notice very, very operational, focusing just on where the U.S. has interest today. Academic literature, on the other hand, is much, much closer to what the news media focuses on. So this tells us that the U.S. government is really the literature that the State Department, that the military and all these other groups, what they're focusing on, that the issues that they're studying are basically yesterday's issues, not what are emerging tomorrow. What's also interesting is that the academic literature is so close to the news media. And there were a lot of questions of high conflict zones. In Congo, for example, would you really have a lot of literature on these conflict zones? Well, it turns out that's because people have studied those for long periods of time. We can also do things, make interactive maps. You can actually watch things like the Ukraine crisis unfold, Nigeria unfold. We can make conflict maps. We can actually make this a daily PDF report that's summarizing what's going on around the world today. What's its context? Make a trends report. So you can actually take, for example, a leader like Maduro, and actually make basically essentially a word cloud of what are all the other world leaders and people that are contextualized along that. What are the connections among world leaders? This actually is a daily report that actually measures every world leader and how global news tone about that leader is shifting over time. It turns out this actually has some very fascinating abilities to actually give you some really interesting estimates as to what that leader is going to be doing soon. Here's an example of taking everything said around the world about the Mexican drug cartels and actually basically saying everything worldwide in the news media about the Mexican drug cartels, make a heat map of that. Turns out this actually matches DEA's map very, very closely at the time period this was made. We can take all the world's ethnic groups that are in the news media and actually look in 5-year segments over the last quarter century how the world's ethnic groups, so this is basically co-mentions and interactions recorded in the news media of the world's ethnic groups and how they form these fascinating complex patterns over time. Now, whether this is a reality of the world's ethnic groups are interacting more in a different fashion today, or whether the news media is changing its portrayal of those, we're taking the first steps towards being able to view that. Being able to take something like the Affordable Health Care Act and actually measuring the emotion of American news media in real time and watching how the media reacts to that. The ability, for example, to take something, say, the Nigerian oil and gas industry, and actually build a spreadsheet in real time that actually tells you who are the top 20 most influential people in the Nigerian oil and gas industry, and be able to separate that out by government officials, by domestic, foreign, and so on. And it turns out this actually matches a ground truth quite closely. We can do things, for example, we can go by month over the last quarter century and say, what is the total intensity of protest activity worldwide? And we see that post-Arab Spring, there's been an enormous leap. If I right there at the end. There's been an enormous increase, actually, in global protest activity post-Arab Spring, but that's only we only see that because for the last 20 years it's been relatively quiet. We're basically back where we were in the 80s, which of course, had the fall of the Soviet Union and all these other things. And we can put in the context things like Ukraine and other events. We can make a network diagram and basically extract out, so this was done for foreign policy last December, pulled out every person I mentioned in the world's news media over a large fraction of 2013, and basically made a huge network diagram connecting all of those. And then what you're seeing here, it's hard to see on the screen, but you're actually seeing these fascinating communities and how the different groups of the world interact and are portrayed through the world's news media. This is a new collaboration with the U.S. Institute of Peace. This is actually a live map updated right now each day, very shortly every 15 minutes. We're mapping all the world's protests in pink and violence in red. And this is actually filtered. That's why you don't see as much in Latin America. This is filtered for larger scale things that are happening on a particular day. So the ability to actually observe, and you can actually then drill in, click, and actually see what's going on in this particular region. So the way of sort of drawing your eye and saying, what's this thing that we're missing over here? And this is actually an animated map. It actually shows you the last 180 days. So as you actually look at this, you literally see the moment that ISIS begins to get traction from the earliest stages, you actually see that, and you actually see their motion across the country. If you drill into Nigeria, you can actually see Boko Haram. You can actually see it start taking roots. You can actually see as it gains territory, falls back. You can actually see as it's bursting, as it's sort of hopping and gaining new territory, and then joining that together. You start seeing all these spatial patterns. But perhaps the most fascinating is this map. So this was basically, the question behind this is you've got 250 million records of riots, protests, coups, et cetera, every country, city level, 1979 to present. What if you could say, give me the last 2 months of Ukraine, make a timeline of the intensity of unrest in that country by day, and then look at a rolling window over the entire last quarter century. Basically, take a 2-month rolling window over every country over the last 35 years, and basically say the last 2 months of Ukraine. What are all the points and what are all the periods in history that are most similar to right now? And basically do mass cross correlation, 2.5 million correlations, and take the ones that are most similar, average those together, and it turns out basically what you're seeing here is red is actually what happened, and green was actually the forecast you get from this. And basically, it's a little bit hard to see up here, but it turns out this actually gives you some incredibly accurate forecasts actually for Egypt, for Ukraine, for a lot of the recent crises that have been going on. And basically, what's interesting about this is this was actually using, so Google has something called Bigquery, which is a big database engine. This is a single line of SQL code, 2.5 minutes to do 2.5 million correlations. And so what's so fascinating about this is we've reached a point, normally to do something of this massive, say I want to run basically massive, exhaustive cross-correlation of a data set. I want to see all the patterns that are here. That would require writing enormous amounts of code and doing all kinds of really in-depth analyses. And that's the amazing part today, is that with the cloud infrastructure we have today, with the platforms that we have, and the tools that are out there, the ability to be able to to start sifting out these patterns. Now again, and I'm over time now, but again, what you're seeing here is a cross between the reality of society and the news media's portrayal of society. But for the first time, we're able to start sifting out those patterns. So whether these are the psychohistorical equations of life, doubtful, or more likely a more precise mathematical measuring of how media portrays the world, we're able for the first time to start taking those steps towards it and creating that that perfect vision of it. So there's my contact information if you're interested. Thank you so much.